The first GMC deuce-and-a-half truck rumbled into the prisoner processing camp near Casablanca in May 1943, its olive-drab paint dusty from the North African desert, its American crew looking impossibly young to the battle-hardened German prisoners watching from behind barbed wire. As the truck's tailgate dropped and supplies began flowing out, a ripple of laughter spread through the ranks of captured Afrika Korps veterans. "Look at that American toy," scoffed Hauptmann Wilhelm Krauss, a tank commander who had fought across France and the Western Desert. "No wonder they're losing so many vehicles. That thing wouldn't last a day in real combat." His fellow prisoners nodded in agreement, their confidence in German engineering superiority intact despite their recent capture. These were elite soldiers from Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps, men who had driven the finest military vehicles the Third Reich could produce. They had commanded massive Tiger tanks, ridden in sophisticated half-tracks, and operated Mercedes-Benz trucks that represented the pinnacle of German mechanical engineering. To their trained eyes, the simple, unglamorous American truck looked crude, cheap, and utterly inferior. They had no way of knowing they were witnessing the beginning of the largest vehicle production program in human history, or that before the war ended, over 500,000 of these inferior American trucks would roll across every continent, fundamentally changing how modern armies moved, supplied themselves, and ultimately won wars. If you want to discover more incredible stories of how American industrial might changed the course of World War II, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Obergifferter Hans Müller crouched beside his disabled Panzer IV tank in the Tunisian desert, watching with professional disdain as American forces consolidated their positions following the German retreat. As a veteran mechanic who had maintained some of the Wehrmacht's finest armored vehicles, Müller took pride in German engineering superiority that had dominated European battlefields for 3 years. The German military machine that Müller served represented the pinnacle of 1940s automotive technology. Mercedes-Benz produced trucks with sophisticated suspension systems, precision-engineered transmissions, and luxury features that reflected German attention to detail. BMW and Auto Union manufactured motorcycles that were marvels of mechanical sophistication. Most impressive of all were the tanks, Panzer, IVs, Tigers, and Panthers that combined advanced metallurgy, complex engineering, and devastating firepower. When American forces overran his position near Medini, Müller was genuinely curious to examine enemy equipment up close. What he saw confirmed his preconceptions about American industrial inferiority. The GMC truck that transported him to the prisoner processing center was, in his professional opinion, a mechanical joke. The American truck's design philosophy was completely alien to German engineering principles. Where German vehicles featured complex, precisely machined components, the GMC used simple, rough-cast parts. Where German trucks included sophisticated transmissions with multiple gear ratios, the American vehicle had a basic 4-speed manual that seemed designed for unskilled operators. The suspension was crude, the interior Spartan, and the overall construction appeared hastily assembled. "This is what happens when amateurs try to build military equipment," Müller explained to fellow prisoners as they were transported to Camp Hearn in Texas. "They make everything as simple and cheap as possible. No pride in craftsmanship. No attention to engineering excellence." Hauptmann Wilhelm Krauss, examining the truck's engine during a maintenance stop, agreed completely. The American power plant was a simple, inline 6-cylinder design that lacked the sophisticated features of German engines. No overhead camshafts, no advanced fuel injection, no precision balance components. It was, he concluded, exactly what he would expect from a nation that prioritized quantity over quality. The German prisoners' confidence in their technological superiority had deep historical roots. Germany had pioneered the automobile industry, with innovators like Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler. German engineers had developed diesel engines, invented the jet aircraft, created rocket technology that was decades ahead of any competitor. The Autobahn highway system demonstrated German ability to think systematically about transportation infrastructure during the early war years. This technological confidence had been repeatedly validated on battlefields across Europe. German tanks had outclassed French armor during the 1940 campaign. Luftwaffe aircraft had demonstrated superiority over British fighters during the Battle of Britain's early phases. German submarines had terrorized Allied shipping with advanced torpedo technology and sophisticated underwater capabilities, even in North Africa. Where the Afrika Korps was ultimately defeated, German equipment had generally outperformed Allied vehicles in direct comparisons. Rommel's forces had captured and used British and American equipment, finding it inferior to German alternatives in most respects. This experience reinforced German prisoners' belief that their defeat resulted from numerical disadvantage rather than technological inferiority. The simple American truck represented everything German engineers had been trained to avoid. It looked utilitarian rather than sophisticated, mass-produced rather than carefully crafted, designed for replacement rather than repair. From a German perspective, it embodied the kind of throwaway mentality that characterized American consumer culture, impressive in quantity but lacking in quality. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, a former automotive engineer captured with the 21st Panzer Division, conducted detailed examinations of American vehicles whenever possible. His professional assessment was uniformly negative. They build like they're planning to throw these machines away after a few months of use. No German manufacturer would accept such loose tolerances and rough finishing. Some German prisoners initially interpreted American mechanical simplicity as evidence of industrial backwardness. How could a nation that produced such crude equipment hope to match German engineering sophistication? The obvious answer, they concluded, is that America couldn't, which meant German victory remained inevitable once production and logistics problems were resolved. But as their transport convoy joined the main highway leading inland from the coast, these confident German engineers were about to witness something that would challenge every assumption they held about American industrial capacity and military logistics. The first American convoy that Hauptmann Wilhelm Krauss witnessed from his prisoner transport seemed impressive, but not overwhelming. Perhaps 50 vehicles heading toward the front lines in Tunisia. As a veteran of mechanized warfare who had commanded panzer units across North Africa, Krauss made mental notes about American logistics capabilities while maintaining his professional skepticism about their equipment quality. But then came the second convoy, and the third, and the fourth. By the time Krauss's transport reached the main coastal highway, he realized he wasn't witnessing individual convoys, but rather a continuous stream of American vehicles that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon in both directions. Hour after hour, the flow continued. GMC trucks loaded with ammunition, food, fuel, and replacement parts. Diamond T heavy haulers carrying disabled tanks for repair. Dodge ambulances ferrying wounded soldiers to field hospitals. Jeeps darting between larger vehicles with dispatch. Riders and staff officers. The variety was staggering, but more impressive still was the sheer volume. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, pressed against the window of his prisoner transport, began attempting to count vehicles but gave up after reaching 500 without seeing any break in the traffic. "This is impossible," he muttered to fellow prisoners. "No army in history has ever had this many trucks." The German prisoners were witnessing the result of the largest military vehicle production program ever undertaken. American factories were producing trucks, jeeps, and support vehicles at rates that seemed to defy the laws of industrial economics. General Motors alone was manufacturing over 100,000 vehicles per year, while Ford, Chrysler, and dozens of smaller companies contributed additional tens of thousands to the war effort. What amazed the prisoners wasn't just the quantity, but the apparent standardization. Unlike German forces, which operated a bewildering variety of captured, modified, and purpose-built vehicles, the American Army seemed to use relatively few basic designs produced in enormous quantities. The same GMC truck appeared repeatedly, differing only in specific cargo configurations. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, observing with an engineer's eye, began to appreciate the logistical advantages of American standardization. Every truck uses the same engine, the same transmission, the same basic components, he noted. Maintenance must be incredibly simplified when mechanics only need to learn a few basic designs. The fuel logistics alone seemed impossible to German observers accustomed to chronic supply shortages. Every American vehicle burned gasoline with apparent disregard for conservation. Trucks idled for hours during traffic delays, consuming fuel that would have been precious beyond measure to German forces. The casual abundance suggested supply lines so robust that waste was affordable as night fell. The convoy traffic continued under artificial illumination that turned the highway into a river of lights stretching to the horizon. German forces had been forced to move primarily at night to avoid Allied air attacks, using minimal lighting to prevent detection. Yet here were Americans moving freely in massive convoys with headlights blazing, apparently unconcerned about enemy air threats. Prisoners learned from their guards that this tremendous vehicle flow was just one of many similar highways across North Africa. American forces had established supply routes from Casablanca to Tunisia, from Algiers to the front lines, from dozens of ports to forward positions. The scale of the logistics network seemed to dwarf anything the Wehrmacht had ever achieved. Sergeant Fritz Weber, a supply specialist captured near Kasserine Pass, tried to calculate the implications. If Americans could maintain this level of vehicle traffic across thousands of miles of supply routes, their total production capacity must exceed German capabilities by factors he found difficult to believe. Either this is an elaborate deception, he concluded, or we have seriously underestimated American industrial strength. The convoy observation continued for 3 days, as prisoner transports moved toward coastal ports for shipment to America. During that entire period, the flow of American vehicles never stopped, never significantly diminished, and never showed signs of strain or shortage. What German prisoners had initially dismissed as crude American equipment was demonstrating reliability and endurance that their sophisticated German vehicles had never achieved. By the time they reached the embarkation port, many German prisoners were beginning to question their assumptions about American industrial inferiority. The trucks they had laughed at were proving capable of continuous operation under conditions that would have disabled more sophisticated German equipment. The Willow Run plant outside Detroit stretched beyond what the human eye could see. Mile-long assembly line where B-2 for Liberator bombers emerged at the rate of 1 every 63 minutes. But for German prisoner Hans Müller, assigned to work in the adjacent truck production facility, the real revelation wasn't the aircraft assembly, but witnessing firsthand how Americans mass-produced the inferior vehicles he had once mocked. Standing on the factory floor at General Motors' massive truck plant in Pontiac, Michigan, Müller watched in professional amazement as GMC deuce-and-a-half trucks rolled off production lines with clockwork precision. What he had initially dismissed as crude American engineering revealed itself as something far more sophisticated, a manufacturing philosophy that prioritized efficiency, reliability, and massive scale over individual craftsmanship. The assembly line moved with mechanical rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. Workers installed identical components in identical sequences, each operation timed to the second. Unlike German manufacturing, which relied heavily on skilled craftsmen making individual adjustments and modifications, the American system was designed so that relatively unskilled workers could produce complex vehicles with consistent quality. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, working as a technical translator, gained access to American engineering drawings and production specifications that revealed the true genius of American truck design. Every component was engineered not for maximum performance, but for maximum manufacturability. Parts were designed to be stamped, cast, or machined using standardized equipment that could be rapidly replicated across multiple factories. They're not building trucks, Zimmermann explained to fellow prisoners during their evening discussions. They're building a truck-building system. Every factory can produce identical vehicles because every component is designed to be made the same way everywhere. The standardization extended far beyond individual components to entire production processes. American factories used identical tooling, identical assembly sequences, and identical quality control procedures. This systematic approach meant that production could be rapidly expanded by building new factories that replicated proven methods rather than developing new manufacturing techniques. Müller observed that American workers operated with casual, efficiency that contrasted sharply with German factory discipline. There was no military-style hierarchy, no harsh supervision, no punishment for minor errors. Yet productivity exceeded anything he had witnessed in German facilities. Workers seemed motivated by personal pride and collective purpose rather than fear of authority. The quality control revelation particularly impressed. German prisoners trained to expect precision craftsmanship. American trucks weren't precision engineered in the German sense, but they were consistently engineered. Every vehicle met identical specifications with tolerances that ensured interchangeability of parts and predictable performance under field conditions. The scale of American production became clear through daily observation. The Pontiac plant alone produced over 100 trucks per day, 7 days per week, with no apparent limit on raw material availability. Steel, rubber, glass, and other materials flowed into the factory in quantities that seemed unlimited. German factories had struggled with material shortages since 1942, yet Americans seemed to take abundant supplies for granted. Most impressive was the speed with which Americans could modify production to meet changing military requirements. When specifications changed for improved engines or different cargo configurations, the entire production line adapted within weeks rather than months. This flexibility allowed rapid responses to battlefield feedback and evolving tactical requirements. The workforce diversity amazed. German prisoners raised on Nazi ideology about racial hierarchies. African-American workers operated complex machinery, supervised production processes, and solved technical problems alongside white colleagues. Women performed precision assembly work, quality inspection, and even supervisory roles. This integration of different groups contradicted everything Germans had been taught about American social fragmentation. Sergeant Fritz Weber, observing the plant's maintenance operations, discovered that American factories were designed for continuous operation rather than periodic overhauls. Production lines ran 24 hours per day with minimal downtime for maintenance. Its reliability was built into the manufacturing equipment itself, which was over-engineered to handle constant use. The economic implications gradually became clear to prisoners with business backgrounds. American truck production wasn't just meeting military requirements, it was exceeding them by enormous margins. Factories were simultaneously producing vehicles for civilian use, Lend-Lease shipments to allies, strategic reserves that dwarfed German planning assumptions. As winter turned to spring, in 1944, these prisoners were beginning to understand that American industrial capacity wasn't just superior to German capabilities, it was superior by orders of magnitude that made German defeat mathematically inevitable. The Liberty ship SS Robert Ely docked at Norfolk, Virginia in March 1944, and German prisoner Wilhelm Krauss watched in stunned silence as an endless stream of American trucks rolled down the gangways. These weren't the same vehicles he had mocked in North Africa. They were identical GMC trucks. But now he understood what that standardization really meant for American military logistics. During his months in American captivity, Krauss had begun to comprehend the systematic genius behind American vehicle design. The crude simplicity he had initially dismissed was actually sophisticated logistics engineering. Every American truck was designed not just to perform its mission, but to be easily maintained, rapidly repaired, quickly replaced anywhere. In the world at Camp Lee, Virginia, prisoners worked alongside American mechanics and discovered the true miracle of American standardization. A mechanic trained on GMC trucks in Louisiana could service identical vehicles in Alaska, North Africa, or the Pacific without retraining. Spare parts from one truck fit perfectly in any other truck of the same model. This interchangeability eliminated the nightmare of specialized maintenance that plagued German forces. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, working in the camp motor pool, observed American maintenance procedures with growing professional respect. Where German vehicles required skilled mechanics familiar with specific models and individual quirks, American trucks could be serviced by anyone with basic mechanical training. The repair manuals were written for common soldiers rather than engineering specialists. The parts supply system particularly amazed German prisoners familiar with Wehrmacht logistic struggles. American supply depots stocked identical components for thousands of vehicles, rather than hundreds of different parts for specialized equipment. A single warehouse could support entire divisions, because standardization had reduced the complexity. Of supply chain management to simple arithmetic, Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann discovered that American logistics thinking extended far beyond individual vehicles to entire transportation systems. Roads, bridges, fuel depots, and maintenance facilities were all designed around standardized vehicle specifications. This systematic approach meant that infrastructure built for one American unit could support any other American unit without modification. The fuel logistics represented perhaps the most impressive achievement. German forces had struggled with fuel shortages since 1942, carefully rationing gasoline and diesel for essential operations. Yet American vehicles consumed fuel with apparent disregard for conservation, suggesting supply systems so robust that waste was affordable rather than catastrophic. American prisoners shared stories about the Red Ball Express dedicated highway routes where truck convoys moved supplies from Atlantic ports to advancing armies in France. The scale of these operations seemed impossible to German observers. Thousands of trucks carrying millions of tons of supplies across hundreds of miles of roads, operating around the clock for months without interruption. The speed of American logistics adaptation amazed prisoners who had observed German supply systems struggling to keep pace with battlefield changes. When American forces advanced rapidly, supply lines extended seamlessly. When operations shifted to different sectors, truck routes redirected without apparent difficulty. This flexibility suggested organizational capabilities that exceeded pure industrial production. Sergeant Fritz Weber, working in camp administration, gained access to American military logistics manuals that revealed the mathematical precision behind truck deployment. Americans calculated supply requirements not in terms of what was barely adequate, but in terms of what would ensure overwhelming superiority. Every division received more trucks than German planning would have considered necessary. The maintenance philosophy represented another fundamental difference from German practices. Where German forces attempted to repair and maintain vehicles for years of service, Americans designed trucks for replacement rather than endless repair. When vehicles reached certain mileage or maintenance thresholds, they were simply replaced with new production rather than extensively rebuilt. This replacement strategy required production capacity that dwarfed Dorman capabilities but provided enormous tactical advantages. American units never faced the chronic vehicle shortages that plagued German forces. Broken trucks were abandoned rather than laboriously repaired under combat conditions. Maintenance personnel focused on routine service rather than emergency repairs. The spare parts availability seemed unlimited to prisoners accustomed to German scarcity. American mechanics discarded components that German technicians would have carefully rebuilt. Engines with minor problems were replaced entirely, rather than repaired. This apparent waste reflected production abundance that made replacement more economical than repair. As D-Day approached, and American preparations intensified, German prisoners began to understand that the trucks they had once mocked were about to support the largest amphibious invasion in history, and that American logistics capabilities had made German defeat not just probable, but inevitable. June 6, 1944. D-Day. While German forces struggled to repel the Allied invasion at Normandy beaches, 8 German prisoners in American camps watched newsreels that revealed the ultimate demonstration of American logistics supremacy. The operation they witnessed wasn't just a military assault, it was the largest logistics miracle in human history. Powered by the same trucks they had once dismissed as inferior, Hauptmann Wilhelm Krauss sat in the recreation hall at camp Shelby, Mississippi, watching film footage of American vehicles streaming ashore at Utah and Omaha beaches. The scope of the operation was staggering: 150,000 troops, 50,000 vehicles, and millions of tons of supplies transported across the English Channel and landed on hostile shores in a single day. What struck German prisoners most profoundly was the systematic nature of the invasion logistics. This wasn't a desperate gamble or heroic improvisation. It was industrial warfare executed with mechanical precision. American trucks rolled off LST landing ships with clockwork regularity, immediately forming convoys that moved supplies inland. With the efficiency of factory assembly lines, the mulberry harbors, artificial ports constructed in England and towed across the Channel, represented engineering achievements that dwarfed anything German forces had attempted. These massive concrete structures allowed American trucks to drive directly from ships to shore, creating instant logistics capabilities that could support entire armies without capturing existing ports. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann observed the newsreels. With an engineer's appreciation for systematic planning, they didn't just plan to invade, he explained to fellow prisoners. They planned to supply an invasion indefinitely. Every truck, every road, every fuel depot was designed months in advance. For operations we're watching happen today, the Red Ball Express, visible in combat footage, demonstrated American logistics capabilities that seemed almost supernatural to German observers. Dedicated truck routes moved supplies from Normandy beaches to advancing armies hundreds of miles. Inland, American drivers operated around the clock, maintaining supply flows that kept pace with the fastest military advances in history. Obergruppenführer Hans Müller counted vehicles in the newsreel footage until he lost track of numbers. Conservative estimates suggested that Americans had landed more trucks in a single day than the entire German army possessed on the Western Front. The scale of mechanical superiority was so overwhelming that tactical brilliance became irrelevant. The fuel logistics particularly amazed prisoners familiar with German supply struggles. American forces were operating thousands of vehicles continuously without apparent fuel shortages. Gasoline flowed through portable pipelines, temporary depots, and mobile tankers with abundance that made conservation unnecessary. German forces had been rationing fuel since 1943, yet Americans seemed to waste gasoline with casual disregard for scarcity. The maintenance capabilities visible in combat footage revealed another dimension of American logistics superiority. Mobile repair shops, spare parts depots, and replacement vehicles followed immediately behind advancing forces. American units never faced the chronic mechanical breakdowns that plagued German forces operating with inadequate maintenance support. Sergeant Fritz Weber noted the diversity of American vehicles performing specialized functions he had never imagined. Amphibious trucks drove directly from ships to shore. Specialized haulers moved heavy equipment across sand and mud. Mobile workshops provided on-site repairs for complex mechanical problems. This variety suggested planning depth that anticipated every possible logistics challenge. The speed of American supply operations contradicted German assumptions about logistics limitations, where German forces required days or weeks to establish supply lines after territorial advances. American trucks were delivering ammunition and fuel to frontline units within hours of beach landings. This rapid logistics response allowed sustained offensive operations that German defensive planning had never anticipated. Most sobering for German prisoners was the realization that Normandy represented just one of many simultaneous American logistics operations. While supporting the European invasion, American forces were simultaneously advancing across the Pacific, supplying Soviet allies through Lend-Lease, maintaining production levels that exceeded peacetime capabilities. The mathematical implications became inescapable. If Americans could land 50,000 vehicles in a single day while maintaining global operations elsewhere, their total production capacity exceeded German estimates by factors that made resistance pointless. The trucks that had once seemed crude now appeared as instruments of inevitable German defeat. As summer turned to autumn and American forces broke out of Normandy, German prisoners began to understand that they were witnessing not just military victory, but the emergence of a new form of industrial warfare that would reshape global politics forever. The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. But for German prisoners preparing for repatriation, the true measure of their defeat was visible every day in American logistics operations that had grown beyond military necessity into demonstrations of industrial supremacy that would reshape the post-war world. Hauptmann Wilhelm Krauss, boarding a transport ship at Norfolk in November 1945, looked back at a port where American trucks continued flowing in endless streams despite the war's end. These vehicles weren't heading to combat zones but to civilian factories, construction projects, and rebuilding efforts that would transform not just America, but the entire global economy. The numbers that emerged after the war staggered even prisoners who had witnessed American production firsthand. Over 500,000 trucks had been produced for military use alone, millions more manufactured for civilian purposes. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler had collectively produced more vehicles during the war than all other nations combined had manufactured in their entire automotive histories, but the trucks themselves were only part of a larger transformation that German prisoners had inadvertently witnessed. The logistics systems, manufacturing techniques, and organizational methods developed for military purposes were now being applied to civilian reconstruction on a scale that would create unprecedented global prosperity. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann returned to a devastated Germany carrying notebooks filled with observations about American manufacturing techniques. As German industries struggled to rebuild from war damage, former prisoners like Zimmermann became advocates for adopting American production methods that emphasized standardization, quality control, and systematic efficiency over traditional craftsmanship. Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, delivered American aid to Europe using the same logistics systems that had supported the D-Day invasion. German prisoners who had mocked American trucks now watched identical vehicles delivering food, medicine, and industrial equipment that would rebuild their homeland. The generosity was powered by abundance they had learned to respect. Hans Mueller used his experience with American automotive technology to help establish Volkswagen's post-war production lines. The principles he had observed in American factory standardization, worker empowerment, and continuous improvement became foundations for German industrial recovery that would eventually challenge American automotive dominance. The democratic values embedded in American logistics systems proved as influential as the mechanical innovations. German prisoners had observed American workers organizing unions, participating in production decisions, and earning wages that allowed them to purchase the products they manufactured. These lessons contributed to labor relations in post-war Germany that emphasized cooperation over conflict. The global highway systems built during the Cold War reflected lessons learned from American military logistics. The Autobahn network, interstate highway system, and similar projects worldwide were designed using principles German prisoners had witnessed: standardized specifications, systematic planning, and integration of civilian and military transportation. Needs. The civilian truck industry that emerged in the 1950s bore the direct influence of wartime American innovations. European and Japanese manufacturers adopted American production techniques, quality standards, and design philosophies that emphasized reliability over sophistication. The crude simplicity that German prisoners had once mocked became the global standard for commercial vehicle design. Former prisoner Wilhelm Krauss established a transportation company in post-war Germany using organizational methods he had observed in American military logistics. His business emphasized standardized equipment, systematic maintenance, professional driver training that reflected American military practices adapted for civilian use. The economic miracle of 1950s, Germany was built partly on insights gained by former prisoners who understood that American prosperity resulted from systematic advantages rather than temporary circumstances. Their advocacy for democratic capitalism, technological innovation, and international cooperation helped establish the foundation for European integration and Atlantic alliance. Perhaps most significantly, the trucks that had once symbolized American mechanical inferiority became symbols of democratic values that transcended national boundaries. The same standardization that made American logistics possible also made international cooperation achievable through shared technical standards and common approaches to complex problems. Today, the global logistics systems that move goods across continents trace their origins to the American truck production programs that German prisoners once dismissed as crude and inferior. The container ships, standardized cargo systems, and integrated transportation networks that define modern commerce all reflect principles these prisoners learned to respect during their American captivity. The wheels that had rolled past German Prisoners and seemingly endless convoys had indeed changed the world, not through conquest, but through demonstration that democratic societies could achieve industrial and organizational capabilities that authoritarian systems could never match. If this incredible story of how American industrial genius transformed global warfare and logistics inspired you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales of innovation that changed the course of history.